If you know me, you know I'm always on the lookout for stories with new, terrifying monster encounters. Skinwalkers and Wendigos are nice and all that, but I crave something new. That's why today I'm excited to share with you a story I got from a user named Dinsif called The Tree God of Alaska. And if there's any truth to this story, then I should warn anyone living in or visiting Alaska that there might be something extremely dark and ancient lurking in the woods and around cabins looking for its next target. Believe what you will or won't, but this story might be a good reason to stay away from Alaska. Lee died last spring. Pancreatic cancer, which is about as unfair as it sounds. But he went at home with his wife and kids around him, and I don't think he was scared. I drove up for the funeral, even though my back doesn't do well with long trips anymore, and afterward his daughter Jenna pulled me aside and asked about the scar on her father's left hand. "He never told me how he got it," she said. "Every time I asked, he would say it was from a camping trip, but it always looked like someone bit him." I told her it was a long time ago, and I didn't remember the details. But she knew I was lying. Jenna was as sharp as her dad, but she let it go anyway. I'm an old man now. Lee was the best friend I ever had, and he's gone. And I think that means I can finally talk about what happened on the Dalton Highway in October of 1989. It's been decades. That's long enough. So I met Lee sophomore year in the weight room at Central High. Neither of us belonged there. The weight room was for football players and wrestlers, guys who moved through the hallways like they owned the place. And Lee and I were the kind of kids who ate lunch in the library and hoped nobody would talk to us. But we'd both gotten it into our heads that lifting weights might make us less invisible and make us want to be less invisible. So there we were, trying to figure out the bench press while a bunch of juniors snickered at us from the squat rack. Lee dropped a 25-pound plate on his foot the first day. Didn't even flinch. Just picked it up and racked it like nothing happened. And when I asked if he was okay, he said, "I've had worse." We started lifting together after that, spotting each other mostly, though neither of us ever put up enough weight to really need it. Lee was funny in a way that snuck up on you. He had a deadpan, dark kind of humor. Could always find something absurd in anything. I learned about his home life in pieces over the next 2 years. His dad was a drinker who thought belts were for more than holding up pants, and his mom was a substitute who was somehow always busy, so she wasn't home to see the bruises. Or maybe she saw them and didn't know what to do. Lee never talked about it directly. He would say things like, "I'm staying at my grandma's for the weekend," when his dad was on a bender. Or he'd show up at school moving real stiff and say he had slept wrong. Junior year, his parents finally divorced. His mom moved them to a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of town, and Lee seemed lighter for a while. But something had already settled into him by then, a sort of weight he had to deal with. He apologized all the time for things that were never his fault, or weren't even things at all. Sorry for being in the way, or sorry for talking too much, sorry for existing, basically. I didn't know how to help him with any of that. I was 19 and stupid, and my own parents were fine. Distant, at worst, but fine. I'd never been hit in my life, so I just tried to be there for him, which probably wasn't enough. Lee's big thing senior year was the van he got. He bought it off a guy named DJ. A 78 Dodge Tradesman with rust along the wheel wells and an engine that sounded like it was coughing up a lung. The cool part? Well, DJ had started converting the back into a camper before his wife got pregnant, and he had to sell it. Lee finished the job over the winter. In the back was a plywood platform for a mattress, curtains his mom sewed from old bed sheets, a 2-burner camp stove that he mounted to a piece of plywood that was definitely not up to code. "We're going to Alaska," he told me in February of senior year, showing me the completed interior like it was the Sistine Chapel. "After graduation, The Dalton Highway, you and me. I asked him why Alaska, and he got this look on his face. He was serious. He kind of looked hungry too, but because it's the emptiest place I can think of, he said. I want to go somewhere so big and quiet that everything sort of just falls away. At the time, I wasn't really sure what he meant. I thought he was being dramatic, the way people are at that age. But I said sure, because Lee was my best friend, and because I didn't have any better plans. We left right after I'd failed to register for community college, and Lee had failed to find a job that didn't make him want to walk into traffic. The van made it through Montana, through the endless plains of Alberta, through the Yukon with its mountains that looked like God had crumpled up paper and forgotten to smooth it out. We broke down once near Whitehorse, the alternator, which cost us 3 days and most of our repair fund. But otherwise, the trip was the adventure we'd wanted it to be. Lee narrated the whole thing like he was hosting a nature documentary. He'd look out the window at a moose standing in a field and say, in something akin to a David Attenborough voice, "Here we see the North American moose in its natural habitat, contemplating the futility of existence." He made me laugh so hard once that I had to pull over because I couldn't see the road. We crossed into Alaska in late September. The light was already changing with those shorter days and longer twilights. We saw shades of purple I didn't know were possible. A week into Alaska, we stopped at a roadhouse about 50 miles south of the Yukon River crossing. The place looked like it might collapse any second, and the handful of locals inside looked at us like we were from Mars. Maybe we were, really. We got talking with one of them, a guy named Harold or maybe Howard, I can't remember. He was maybe 60, with a beard that had given up on being a particular color, and hands that looked like they'd done hard work most of his life. He asked what brought us up this way, and Lee told him we were driving the Dalton Highway to Dead Horse. "Bold choice for October," the guy said. "You boys know what you're getting into?" Lee said we did, though I don't think we did. The guy bought us around. First beer I'd ever had that wasn't stolen from my dad's garage fridge, and no one ID'd us, so that was great. They and we could have gotten in a lot of trouble. He then started to tell us about the area, the pipeline and the work camps, and the cold, especially the cold. Then Lee asked about local legends, which was something he always did wherever we stopped. He had a thing for that stuff like ghost stories and folklore. He liked the idea that the world was more magical or strange than it looked. The guy got quiet though, for a second, and I thought maybe Lee had offended him. But then he said, "There's the Mickelson place. That's not really a legend, though. That's just something that happened. I should note here that I'm changing the name of the place to avoid unwanted attention there." Anyway, apparently the Mickelsons were homesteaders, the guy told us. A family of 4, husband, wife, and 2 kids, who'd staked a claim about 40 miles north of where we were currently sitting back in the late 50s. They were found dead in the winter of 1962. Officially, it was ruled an animal attack, probably a polar bear, though that didn't make much sense given how far they were from polar bear territory. But that's what locals believed, because of the bodies. "The bodies were wrong," the guy said, and he wasn't looking at us anymore. He was staring at his drink. "You see, the father was in the root cellar with the door barred from the outside. The mother and kids were in the main room, but they weren't lying down like they'd been attacked. They were sitting down, arranged around where the table should have been. Except there was no table, just them sitting in a row, looking at nothing." Lee asked about the wounds. "They looked like big bites with very sharp teeth that took its time, but they were real clean. This is why people think it's a polar bear that did it." Then Lee asked something that made me give him wide eyes, if the house was still there. The guy said it was, probably, if you know where to look, about 40 miles north, off a certain back road that didn't show up on the maps. Sure, I thought. "Nobody goes out there, though," the guy said. Why not? Lee asked. That's when the guy stood up to leave, but he told us, "Place feels wrong. Even the animals stay away from there." I was hoping Lee would forget about the story. I mean, people in bars aren't exactly the most trustworthy. But 2 days later, we made camp in a pullout about 30 miles north of the roadhouse, and Lee woke me up before dawn saying he wanted to go for a walk. It was insanely cold. Cold enough that my breath looked like dragon's flames, and my fingers were numb within minutes. The sun wasn't completely up yet. We followed what looked like an old trail leading away from the road. I wasn't sure why just yet. Lee hadn't explained much if there was something to explain. He was in front, looking like he was leading me somewhere. It didn't look like a casual morning walk to me. But I followed, because I always followed Lee. The landscape was tundra giving way to sparse black spruce, bunch of skinny half-dead trees all over the place, spaced far enough apart that you could see pretty far in every direction. There was no wind, though. Not really any sound, just our footsteps and breathing. I've been in quiet places before, but this gave me some weird vibes. We'd been walking for about 20 minutes when Lee stopped. "Holy crap," he said. There it was. The house was smaller than I'd expected. Just a homestead cabin. Little thing, could have been built in a summer or two by hand. Half of it had collapsed where the roof caved in, and the remaining walls did not look stable. But there was a section that was still standing, intact enough you could probably go inside, if you really wanted to, and I didn't want to. Lee was frozen, not cold frozen, excited frozen. He stared at that house like he was expecting it to come alive and give him a hug. "This is it," he said. "This is the place the guy was talking about." I said it could have been any old cabin. There were probably dozens of these cabins out here, abandoned homesteads from people who'd come north looking for something and found out the hard way that Alaska does not give anything for free. But Lee shook his head at me. "No, man. Look, I dreamed about this place." I raised an eyebrow. "No, listen. 2 nights ago, I didn't tell you because it seemed stupid, but I dreamed about a house that looked exactly like this. The roof caved in, the door hanging open like that, all of it." I rolled my eyes. "Man, that's just a coincidence. Or maybe you saw a picture of this place at the roadhouse somehow and it leaked into your brain." Lee didn't argue. He just kept staring at the place. "Hey, we should go back. It's cold and I'm hungry. And there's not really much worth seeing here." Lee nodded, but he did it slowly. I could tell he didn't want to leave. But why, I wasn't sure. We turned around and started walking back toward the road. I was more relieved than I wanted to admit. Something about that place had gotten under my skin in a bad way. It wasn't really any reason I could understand yet. The house just looked like an old house, and the trees looked like trees, but standing there, looking at that partly collapsed cabin, I felt like I was being watched by something that didn't have eyes. We were almost back to the van when we heard something strange. It came from the direction of the house, a sound that I thought at first was wind moving through the collapsed structure. But as I said before, there was no wind. Then I thought it was an animal, a caribou or maybe a moose, making some kind of vocalization that I wasn't familiar with. It wasn't that either. It sounded like a caribou call, but wrong, stretched out, pitched low. It went on for maybe 5 seconds, then stopped. "Did you just hear that?" I asked Lee. He was standing by the van's passenger door, but he wasn't getting in. Now he was looking back the way we'd come, back toward where the house was hidden by sparse trees. "Hear what?" he said. "That sound like an animal, or I didn't hear anything." I knew he was lying. I knew Lee well enough to know when he was lying. But his face was blank, and his eyes were fixed on that tree line, and he wasn't blinking. "We should move the van closer to the house," Lee said. "Man, why in the world would you want to do that?" "So we don't have to walk as far when we go back." Go back. I should have said no to him. Should have said we weren't going back, that we were getting back on the Dalton Highway and driving to Dead Horse, like we'd planned, forgetting about that house and the story that guy at the bar told us. But Lee was already getting in the van. I was freezing cold, so I didn't feel like arguing. I told myself it didn't really matter. It was just a house. We'd look at the house, creep ourselves out, then leave, and that would be that. I got in and started the engine. The thing coughed to life, and I pulled back onto the road, driving until we found a spot where I could pull off closer to where the house was, because that's what Lee wanted. We parked about 200 yards away, close enough we could see the roofline of the house through the trees, more like what remained of it. Lee was quiet now. When I looked over at him, he was still staring at the house. He looked weirdly satisfied, almost like he was getting off to the fact that we were so close to the place. I was so confused by him at the time. Like, what are we even doing, dude? But I didn't say anything. I didn't want to be whiny on the trip. I often go back to that moment a lot, now that Lee has passed, thinking about how easy it would have been to just keep driving from that point. To have put my foot down, telling him that we were leaving. End of story. But I didn't do that. And 200 yards away through the thin black spruce, the house waited for us. And so did something else. That night, the first night, Lee seemed fine. Better than fine, actually. He was animated, in a way that I hadn't seen him since we'd crossed into Alaska, telling stories about people from high school and laughing about his own jokes before he even finished them. We made dinner on the camp stove, canned chili, which we'd been eating so much of that I still can't look at it without feeling slightly sick. We played a few hands of rummy by the light of the battery-powered lantern Lee had bought at a gas station in Whitehorse, and talked about nothing important. I kept glancing out the back windows. That house was out there, of course. Invisible in this darkness, sure, but I kept thinking about it. Lee wasn't as focused on it as he was before. Now he was shuffling the cards and talking about a girl named Marcy, who'd sat behind us in junior year in English. How he'd always wanted to ask her out, but never worked up the nerve. "You should have done it," I told him. "I think she liked you. I mean, she always laughed at your worst jokes." "Whatever. She was laughing at Mr. Petey's toupee anyway," Lee said. "I just happened to be in the way." He grinned. "Besides, what would the plan have been? Take her back to my apartment so she could meet my mom's cat and see the water stain on the ceiling that looks like Nixon?" We turned in around 11. Lee took the mattress platform in the back. I'd gotten used to sleeping in the passenger seat, reclined as far as it would go, which wasn't far enough, but was better than sleeping on the floor. I fell asleep pretty quick. But I woke up because the van was moving. It wasn't being driven, but it was slightly rocking, like something or someone shifting their weight around. I opened my eyes and saw Lee sitting up in the back, his silhouette outlined against the window by the faint light of stars. He was staring at the house. I couldn't see his face, just the shape of him, motionless, except for his breathing. "Hey, Lee." He didn't answer for a few seconds. Eventually, though, he did answer. "Just looking." His voice was flat. Not like sleepy flat, but like he was emotionless. "At what, dude?" "The house." "It's pitch black out there, man. You can't see a thing." "I know." He lay back down. I heard him pull the sleeping bag up around himself, and I heard his heavy, slow breathing. I told myself it was just a waking dream. The guy was just half asleep, disoriented, maybe had a nightmare or dream of some kind of the Mickelson story, and he woke up confused. But then I heard that sound again. That strange caribou call from somewhere outside. Closer than last time, but not right next to the van. Definitely closer. Not sure if whatever made it was closer to us, or if we were closer to it now. Lee, you heard it that time, right? Huh? He said. He didn't seem impressed or worried. Oh, yeah. What do you think it is? I don't know. I waited for him to say something else. Maybe sit up and investigate it with me or make a joke about it. But he didn't do that. He just lay there, and a few minutes later his breathing changed. He was asleep. But I didn't sleep the rest of the night. It was snowing in the morning. Couldn't tell if it was going to storm later or not. Lee was up before me, which really wasn't like him. He was the type to sleep until noon if you let him. But now he was in the driver's seat, drinking instant coffee from the metal cup we shared, looking out towards the trees. We should check out that house, he said when he heard me move around, before the weather out there gets worse. I wanted to tell him no. I'd spent the last 4 hours of darkness lying awake, listening for that sound again, feeling like there was something outside. But it was daylight now, and in daylight things that seemed scary tend to seem more pathetic or not there. It was just an old cabin, old woods. Fine, I said. But I'd rather not stay too long, okay? The walk only took a few minutes, mainly because the snow started to come down harder. Up close, the cabin looked even more decrepit than it had from a distance. The door was open, not hanging open like we first thought. It was standing open, like someone had pulled it wide and just walked away. Lee went inside first. The interior smelled kind of funny, and I tried not to assume it smelled like corpse considering the legend we were told. It took a second for my eyes to adjust in the dimness. Then I really saw what was left of the place. Water damage had warped the floorboards and stained the walls. There was furniture left, but it had now collapsed into piles of wood and fabric that might have been a chair or a table, something that could have been a bed frame. But one room, through a doorway to the left, looked different. I followed Lee through that doorway and stopped. The room was intact, not just structurally. I'm not kidding when I say this. It looked preserved. No dust on the floor or animal droppings in the corners. The walls were clean, or as clean as walls could be after 30 years of abandonment. There was a window on the far side, clouded with grime but unbroken, and through it I could see the white sky and falling snow. Look at this, Lee said. He was tracing his fingers along the wall nearest the door. I moved closer and saw what he was touching. Marks in the wood, some kinds of patterns. Circles overlapping, scratched deep into the grain with something sharp. They covered the wall, hundreds of them, layer over layer, like someone had spent years adding to it. What do you think made these? Lee asked. It creeped me out that he said what instead of who. I don't know, man. Someone crazy, probably. These aren't random. He was still feeling them with his fingers, moving from one circle to the next. There's a pattern. See how they overlap? It's like I don't know, man, like a language. I told him we should go. The smell was getting to me and the room felt really weird, especially with those patterns. And with the way this room was, it felt like someone was still living here, and I didn't want to be around when they got back. That's when I saw the shoe. There was a shoe lying in the corner, a kid's shoe with a buckle across the top. It was old, with cracked leather but preserved by the cold. Right away I thought of the kids from the story, the Mickelson children, the ones that were found sitting by a table that wasn't there. I felt something real cold moving through my stomach. Lee walked over and actually picked it up. "Dude, put it down," I said. He looked at me and grinned. "It's just a shoe." "Yeah, but put it down." He did, but slowly. "Come on, let's leave," I told him. Lee shrugged his shoulders, but he followed me out of the house, back into the snow, and we walked to the van without talking. When I was about halfway back, I noticed Lee had fallen behind. I turned around and saw him looking down at his left hand. "What's wrong?" I cut myself," he said. He held up his palm. He was right. There was a deep slice across the meat of his hand, just below the fingers. Deep enough that I could see the dark red of the muscle beneath the skin. Red was running down his wrist and dripping onto the snow. "Oh my God, when did you do that?" I don't know." He was looking at the wound. I could tell he was confused and concerned. I didn't feel it." Back at the van, I dug out our first aid kit, wrapping his hand with gauze while he stood there. The cut was bad. He was probably going to need stitches. But Lee didn't seem bothered by the injury itself. He thanked me when I finished, flexing his fingers to test the fix, and he said we should probably head out. I agreed. I wanted to put as much distance between us and the house, what with all the strangeness piling up like this. When I suggested we drive south, back toward the roadhouse and then Fairbanks, Lee said he wanted to stay one more night. "But you just said you wanted to head out." He shook his head. "I meant after another night. I just remembered." He pulled his pack up to his chest, then pulled out a camera. "We should go get some photos of the house, in better light." "Your hand is gonna need stitches," I told him. "It's whatever, it doesn't even hurt." "Lee, one more night, then we'll go." I should have pushed him harder, or even threatened to walk away. But Lee was stubborn when he wanted to be, and I told myself at the time the cut wasn't that bad if that's how he was acting. So one more night wouldn't make a difference. One more night. Lee didn't take any photos. The next morning, he said the light wasn't right. The morning after that, he said he didn't feel like it. And by day 3, he'd stopped mentioning the camera at all. By then, he wasn't even eating. When I made breakfast, he'd take a few bites, then set his plate aside, saying he wasn't hungry. He was sleeping all the time, 10, 12, 14 hours at a stretch. But he woke up looking more exhausted than when he'd gone to bed. He had dark circles under his eyes, and his skin was looking more and more pale by the day. He was saying things too, these utterances across conversations. "Do you think people deserve what happens to them?" he asked one day. "What do you mean?" "Like if someone's already broken, maybe the world's just finishing the job, you know?" I told him that was a messed up way to think about things. He shrugged, then changed the subject. On day 3, he said, "My dad said there was something wrong with me when I was born, like there was something inside me that didn't work right." He hadn't mentioned his father in months, maybe longer than that. "Your dad was a jerk," I said. "He didn't know what he was talking about." Maybe. Lee was looking out the window again. He was doing that a lot now. But what if he did? What if some people are just made for bad things to happen to them? I found him outside the van that night, standing in the cold without a jacket. It was 2 a.m. I'd woke up from a dream I couldn't remember, and I noticed the back door was open, snow blowing in onto the mattress. He was facing the house, standing there, arms at his sides, head tilted slightly, like he was listening to something. "Lee, what the heck are you doing?" He didn't turn around, but he said, "Listening." "To what?" "I don't know. It's hard to explain. It's like there's someone out there saying my name. Not quite, but almost like they're right on the edge of saying it. I grabbed his arm and pulled him back toward the van. His skin was ice cold. He'd been out there long enough that his lips were starting to turn blue. He came with me without resistance, climbing back into the van, letting me wrap a blanket around him. "We're leaving tomorrow," I said. "Okay." "I mean it, Lee. We are done out here." "Okay." He lay down and closed his eyes. In moments, he was asleep. The next morning, he was still sleeping when I got up. I found his sketchbook. Lee had always been a decent artist. Nothing professional, but he could draw a face that looked like a face, a tree that looked like a tree. He'd brought the sketchbook to document the trip, he said, to draw landscapes and capture something a camera simply couldn't. But the pages were filled with the same image, each and every one. And I had no idea what I was looking at. I'll describe it to you as best I can remember it. It was a very tall and a very thin figure, with an extremely long neck, longer than the body, rising from the shoulders and curving slightly before ending in a head tilted to one side, with a face that was blank, but not entirely featureless. The eyes were two slits, and he'd drawn this thing, whatever it was, over and over, page after page. Some versions were rough sketches and just a few lines. Others were detailed and shaded, clearly worked on for hours. In some of them, the figure was standing at the edge of a tree line. In others, it was closer, much closer, filling most of the page. In the last drawing, it was reaching out. I closed the sketchbook and put it back where I found it. I didn't say anything to Lee about it when he woke up. I heard the sound again that night, closer than it had ever been, right outside the van, at most 20 feet away from us. That stretched, horrible vocalization. I went outside. I don't know why. It was the middle of the night and freezing cold, and I knew that whatever was making that sound was something I did not want to meet. But I went anyway. There I saw a shape at the edge of the tree line. In the dark, I could have told myself it was a dead spruce. The silhouette was roughly the right size, roughly the right shape, but there hadn't been anything there before. By that point, I knew every tree in that sparse forest. I had stared at them for hours while Lee slept, trying to convince myself that nothing was wrong, that we were alone like we were supposed to be. This was new, and it was too tall. And the top of it, the part that should have been branches, was tilted a bit. Whatever it was, it didn't move, but the sound was coming from its direction. I was sure of it. I went back inside, telling Lee we were leaving in the morning. He agreed immediately, which scared me more than if he'd argued. He was too agreeable sometimes, prone to changing his mind. Perhaps he was humoring me, like I was a child, afraid of something in the closet. That night, I wedged myself against the back doors and didn't sleep. Around 4 a.m., I heard Lee whispering. He was definitely asleep. His eyes were closed, his breathing slow and regular. But his lips were moving fast, sounds coming out. I couldn't make out any words. It wasn't much more than a murmur. There was frost on his breath even though the heater was running full blast. I watched him until dawn. That next morning, Lee's hand had gotten worse. The wound was sort of gray-pale at the edges now. Dark lines were creeping up from the wrist, which meant infection, and that meant hospital, fast. "We have to get you to a doctor, man," I said. "It's fine." It's not fine, Lee. Look at this. I pulled up his hand to show him. He flexed his fingers. I could tell it was hurting him, but beyond that, there was nothing else to his face. No worry, no concern. It'll be okay, he said. Lee, these lines mean the infection is spreading. If we don't get you antibiotics. I said, it's fine. His voice was different, harder than I'd heard it before. He looked up at me, and for a second I didn't recognize my best friend. He looked cold and hostile, like he was talking to a stranger now, or perhaps I was a threat to him. Then it passed. Suddenly, Lee's expression softened, and he rubbed his eyes with his good hand. I'm sorry, he said. I'm just tired. You're right, we need to go back. That flip-floppiness again. I started packing up while Lee was in the passenger seat, staring out the window. He didn't offer to help. He sat there watching the tree line, his wrapped hand resting on his knee. When I got behind the wheel and started the engine, Lee spoke again. I don't think I'm supposed to leave. What? I don't know. He was still looking out the window, his voice distant and confused, like he was trying to describe a dream that was already fading. I just don't think I'm allowed. I put the van in gear and pulled onto the road anyway. We made it about 5 miles when Lee started to hyperventilate. He was gasping, clutching his chest, tears streaming down his face. I pulled over and he bolted out of the van before I could stop him. Just threw open the door and started back the way we'd come. I caught up to him on the shoulder of the road. He was trembling, mumbling things that didn't make sense. He knows me. I was already his. I have to go back. I can't leave. Lee, look at me, man. Look at me. His eyes were horrible. His pupils were massive, like he was in the midst of the world's worst trip. He looked at me, or perhaps through me, then said, I was always going to end up here. Don't you get that? Some people aren't just made for this. I grabbed him and began to drag him back to the van practically. But he didn't put up a fight. Instead, he went limp, all the resistance draining out of him like water. I got him into the back and told him to stay there. Just stay there while I figured out what to do. I heard the sound again as I climbed into the driver's seat. The caribou call coming from somewhere behind us. Much, much closer. In the rearview mirror, I could see the tree line. And past that tree line, I could see... No, I couldn't have seen that. We were 5 miles from the house now. There was no way to see the house from here. But I saw it. I swear for a second, I saw it. Like the distance we drove never happened. I started to drive, and I didn't look back. We drove for 2 hours before I felt safe enough to stop. By then, we'd passed a work camp and a cluster of vehicles that might have been a surveying team, and the road felt like a road again instead of a thread stretched across something that wanted to swallow it. I pulled into an actual campground, one with marked spaces and a pit toilet, and, most importantly, other people. A pickup truck with Oregon plates was parked 2 spaces over, and I could see a man and a woman setting up a tent in the fading afternoon light. Other people. Normal people doing normal things. I nearly cried with relief. Lee slept for 14 hours. I stayed awake for most of it, watching him breathe and waiting for him to start whispering again, or for his eyes to open with that wrong and empty look. But he just slept, deep and seemingly peaceful. The guy was exhausted. The color started to come back to his face around hour 10, and by 12 hours, he looked almost like himself again. When he finally woke up, the first thing he said was, "I'm sorry." I asked him what he remembered. "Not much, to be honest." He sat up, rubbing his face with his good hand. "I remember the house. I remember feeling a certain way. Kind of like heavy, like something was sitting on my chest that whole time. And then it's just pieces." "Did I really try to walk all the way back?" "Yeah. I basically had to drag you back to the van." Jesus. He looked down at the bandaged hand, flexed his fingers. "I feel like I've been sick for a month. What the heck happened to me?" "No idea. Once we got to that weird house, he just started acting strange, and it got worse till we drove away. But look, we need to go get your hand looked at before you die of an infection. There's a hospital in Fairbanks." Lee agreed. We set out the next morning, and I'll never forget what happened that night. The van's radiator had been threatening to overheat since Whitehorse. At about 4 hours south of the campground, it finally made good on that threat. The temperature gauge climbed into the red, and I pulled over before something expensive happened. We were in the middle of nowhere now. No work camps or surveying teams, just road and tundra and the mountains in the distance, already capped with snow. "How long?" Lee asked. "It'll probably take a couple hours," I replied. "We need to let it cool down completely before we add more fluid." He nodded. He'd been pretty quiet compared to his usual self during the drive, but it was a different kind of quiet, like thoughtful instead of being vacant. My best friend was back, though he did look a bit worried now, which was good. He had been looking out at the landscape, really looking at it, like he was seeing it for the first time. "God, it's beautiful up here," he said. "I didn't notice it before." "Well, you were pretty out of it." "Yeah. Do you think there's something wrong with me? Like fundamentally wrong?" I thought about his father. The years of belts and bruises and being told he was born broken. I looked at him. "No, Lee. I think some bad things happened to you, and you're still dealing with them. That's not the same as being wrong." Lee didn't reply, but I could tell some of the tension left his shoulders, and he smiled at me. We waited. The sun set. I'll tell you, there's nothing quite like the Alaskan sunset. It might be freezing cold out, but if you can endure it, you may just see the most beautiful sights in the world. We wrapped ourselves in sleeping bags and talked about what we would do when we got home, and whether Lee should see a doctor about more than just his hand, or places we would want to visit someday, places that weren't trying to kill us. Around 9 p.m., I fell asleep. I didn't mean to. I was exhausted. I'd barely slept in days, and the sleeping bag was warm. Lee's voice was familiar again and comforting, and at some point, my eyes closed and just wouldn't open again. I woke up suddenly because of the cold. This didn't feel like the cold of a heater that had been off for some time. It was sudden and sharp, like a door open. I opened my eyes, and I saw that the passenger side was empty. The door was hanging open. Outside, the stars were bright and hard, and the temperature had dropped to something that hurt to breathe. Lee was gone. I grabbed the flashlight from the glove compartment and went after him. His footprints were easy enough to follow in the thin layer of snow that had fallen while we slept, a trail of boot prints leading away from the van toward the tree line about 100 yards to the east. I followed them quickly. The footprints ended at a pile of clothes. Lee's jacket, his shirt, his jeans, boots, socks, underwear, everything he'd been wearing was now folded neatly in the snow, like he'd taken them off with care and set them aside. Beyond the pile, a new set of prints continued toward the trees. Bare feet, Lee's. I ran after them. I found him about 100 yards past his clothes, still walking. The guy was naked now, his skin already turning colors I didn't want to think about, and he was moving with a steady stride, like someone going to meet a friend. His feet were leaving blood in the snow. The cold was already damaging the tissue, and he was walking on wounds that he apparently wasn't feeling. "Lee!" He didn't stop, and he didn't turn to me. He showed no sign that he had heard me at all. I caught up to him and grabbed him by the arm. His skin was ice, so cold it burned my palm. I pulled him around to face me, and what I saw made my stomach drop. His face was slack, peaceful. His eyes were open, but they weren't looking at me. They were focused on something past my shoulder, in the direction he'd been walking. There was this small smile on his lips, so satisfied, so comfortable. "It's better this way," he said. His voice sounded dreamy. "I was always going to end up somewhere cold." "Lee, we have to go back. You're gonna die out here." "I know, and that's okay. I was already his. I've been his the whole time. Probably always." I tried to reply, but my breath became a choking gasp, because I saw something then. Something at the tree line. I saw what was waiting for Lee. It was so tall, and so very thin, emaciated. Limbs so long and thin, they looked like tree branches. And the skin across the entirety of it was charred, dark and cracked like something had been burned, but was still somehow alive. There was nothing between its legs, just smooth, dark skin where anatomy should have been. Its neck, though, it rose from the shoulders and kept rising longer than the torso, longer than the arms, curving slightly as it went up, like the stem of a wilting flower. And at the top of that impossible neck was a head that lolled to one side, heavy, dangling at an angle that would have broken a human spine. The face had no mouth, no nose, and instead of eyes, I saw instead these long horizontal slits, like wounds that had never properly healed. And those slits were fixed on Lee with something I can only describe as patience. Whatever that freaking thing was, it wasn't moving or beckoning him. It was standing there at the edge of the trees waiting, and if you were too far away from it, you would think it was just a tree. But I was close enough now, and there was a reason Lee was staring at it. It was the someone who had always been coming, or so he thought. The one who was walking towards you one step at a time. And here was Lee, approaching it, or at least trying to. "Lee," my voice cracked. "Lee, please." He looked at me, and I saw that flicker again in his eyes, the real him coming out for a moment. He panicked and said, "I can't stop. I don't know how." I hate to admit this next part, because I never would have done it, not in any other situation ever. But I punched him then, square in the jaw. I'd never punched anyone before. I didn't even know how to make a fist properly. For some reason, I thought you kept your thumb inside your fingers. I swung and my knuckles connected with his jaw. It was sloppy, and it hurt me, but he dropped like someone had cut his strings. I then grabbed him under the arms and started dragging him back toward the van. He was heavy, 180 pounds of dead weight, and my feet kept slipping in the snow. My hands were cramping from the cold and the weight, and behind me, I could hear something. A dragging sound. Something heavy moving across the frozen ground, coming much, much closer every second. I didn't dare look back. I'd learned enough in the past week to know that some things you shouldn't give a second look. You just run. I made it to Lee's pile of clothes and didn't even stop to grab them. I made it to the van and somehow got the back doors open and somehow hauled Lee inside and somehow got the doors closed behind us. I blame adrenaline. The engine wouldn't start on the first try. Either the cold had thickened the oil, or the universe just wanted me and Lee to suffer a bit more. But it caught on the third attempt, and I threw it into gear and floored the accelerator. The temperature gauge climbed into the red immediately, but I didn't care. I couldn't afford to. I drove with the warning light screaming at me until the tree line was a mile behind us, 5 miles, 10 miles. Thank God we got that far. I drove until the sky started to lighten up. Soon I could make out a work camp ahead, lights and vehicles and people. I pulled over and finally looked over at Lee. He was unconscious, his breathing shallow. His skin was mottled with the red and white of severe frostbite in places. But he was alive, and when I checked his face, the slack, peaceful expression was gone. He looked like a hurt and confused and very, very cold Lee. The hospital in Fairbanks saved his life, though they couldn't save all of him. Frostbite had destroyed tissue in both feet, 2 toes on the left and 1 on the right. The surgeons removed them 3 days after we arrived, while I sat in the waiting room and tried to explain to a police officer how my friend had ended up naked in the Alaskan wilderness. I explained that he'd been sleepwalking, that the stress of the trip had gotten to him and I'd found him just in time. Sort of. I could tell they didn't believe my story, but didn't have anything else to go off of. Lee backed up everything I said when he woke up. We were good at playing off of each other like that. When I talked to him alone, he said he didn't remember leaving the van, or taking his clothes off, or walking into the cold. He said the last thing he remembered was falling asleep in the passenger seat, that I had been telling him about a trip my parents had taken to Yellowstone when I was 8. The cut on his hand healed cleanly. The infection that had been spreading up his arm, the dark lines that terrified me, were gone. The doctors were puzzled. They said it looked like it had never been infected at all. Just a clean wound, already starting to close, which now suspiciously looked more like a bite mark. Lee spent 2 weeks in the hospital. I stayed in Fairbanks the whole time, sleeping in the waiting room or in the van in the parking lot, living off of vending machine food and the kindness of nurses who brought me some food on occasion. When they finally discharged him, we drove south together, slowly, carefully, stopping every few hours so Lee could elevate his feet and I could check on the healing. Lee went on to have a decent life. Not perfect. He always struggled with depression on and off, and he spent some time in therapy. He had a rough patch in his 30s when his marriage almost fell apart, but he came through that. He raised 2 kids who loved him, and he held down a job that didn't make him miserable. He grew old with a woman who understood his dark moods and loved him anyway. He walked with a slight limp from the missing toes, but he walked. In fact, I'd say he walked better than most of us ever run. We stayed friends all those years. We would see each other at least once a year, talking on the phone every few weeks. We would send each other stupid articles we found online. He was the best man at my wedding, and I was there when his daughter was born. But through all that, we rarely talked about Alaska. But it was always there between us. This thing we survived together. But then came the pancreatic cancer. Lee passed. He went fast, thankfully. Probably a mercy when you're dealing with that particular disease. And that circles us back around to where I started. His daughter was asking about the scar on his hand, and I lied to her face, telling her I didn't remember how he got it. I told her it was just a long time ago. But here's the truth. I don't know what happened to us back in 1989 in Alaska. I'm not a religious man. I don't believe in ghosts or demons. I've spent 35 years trying to find a rational explanation for what I saw, and I've never found one that satisfied me. I'll try to explain what I think I believe, to at least give you people some satisfaction. I think there are places where something went horribly, terribly wrong a long time ago. Old, dark places. And those places remember things. And sometimes those things reach out, looking for the kind of person they can use. People who are already hurt. People who are already carrying something dark inside them that they can make use of. People like Lee. And the thing I saw in those trees, the tall, burned figure with the insane neck, I don't think it was hunting Lee. I think it was cultivating him. Finding the cracks that were already there and widening them, feeding on his pain, waiting for him to give up and walk right into its arms. And if he had, I don't know what would have happened. I'm just glad I was there to bring him back before he could do that. If you're out there and you're listening or reading this, I'd really love to know what you think it was. Is there a demon or something that matches the description? An entity that feeds on people's sadness or depression? Before I go, let me just say this. If you're ever driving through Alaska and you see a partially collapsed, old rustic small home through the woods on the side of the road, you should probably forget you ever saw it. That was a touching story. And by touching, I mean it reached into my soul and touched me with its abyssal tendrils. What is this entity? Does it match any known monsters or folklore creatures in North America? Whatever it might be, just make sure to take your next hike or camping trip with a smile. No sad thoughts, got it? Because there could be something out there hungry for your inner darkness. Good night. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Unexplained Encounters. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails. You can follow this podcast every week on Wednesday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app, or catch it on YouTube at Darkness Prevails. If you have a scary true story of the unexplained, send it to me at darkstories.org. Until next time, everyone, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.